in the middle of our inquiry on voter engagement in the UK. Very good of you to spare the time to come and talk to us today. Is there anything you want to say to kick us off, or shall we jump straight into questions?
I have some brief kind of opening remarks I can make if that's helpful.
Fine, please do, yeah.
Thank you. Okay, well, the very first thing I wanted to say was to thank you for inviting me. I think it's a really great thing that your committee has done to invite 38 Degrees members to submit evidence into this inquiry. I'm sure we'll spend the majority of the time talking about the detail of what our members have said, but I thought it might be helpful to start by offering a few reflections on who's saying it, who the members are who've been submitting into this survey, and have been offering us their thoughts on voter engagement. The 38 Degrees membership in general is a pretty broad church. They're a pretty diverse bunch from all over the UK, with, as my written submission sets out, quite a wide range of party political starting points or no party political starting point at all, a wide range of ethnicities, ages, social backgrounds. But they aren't simply a random sample of the general public, as I'm sure you'll be aware. Firstly, they come to 38 Degrees because 38 Degrees is an organisation with a set of values of fairness, sustainability, democracy, human rights and community. And then secondly, they're probably towards the more engaged end of the spectrum. They're people who quite clearly are engaged in questions of politics and policy. They are trying to get involved, and probably on the whole they're fundamentally optimistic about the potential of getting involved to make a difference. That's why they're taking part. I guess there are probably a couple of further sample biases within the responses to this particular survey. The first is, as with any kind of voluntary survey, there's response bias, which in this case I think probably skews things in an optimistic direction. We had many hundreds of our members get in touch with us and say that they didn't think it would make a blind bit of difference to submit into the survey. And I guess that people with those kind of attitudes are therefore probably underrepresented within the results. There's also, within this survey, compared to our membership as a whole, an upward age bias. Got a couple of theories about that. It might well be that it's a relatively long survey and retired people have more time on their hands, particularly given the relatively short amount of time that they had to submit in time for the written response deadline, and that might be one of the things that has biased it. Speculating even further, it might be that our younger members disproportionately fall into the category of those who were sceptical about whether it was worth their while to fill in the survey of this nature. Although when we have looked at the younger people who did fill in the survey, of which there were over 13,000, their results didn't differ markedly from the other respondents. I guess the key message that I am reading from their responses is that there's a crisis of confidence that is manifested in things like voter engagement, in turnout and registration, but it runs quite a lot deeper than that. But in the views of our members, it's a crisis of politics and the political system as well. And I've read a lot of disappointment with politicians who they feel aren't listening, are working for others, not them, are breaking their promises, and for the party political system as a whole, a sense that they don't see values clearly expressed by the parties, they don't see that it makes much difference who they vote for, they don't see clear vision or clear leadership. But I think as well, I see within these results quite a few positive signs and practical solutions, which I hope we can explore as well. For a start, although the overall message from our members is pretty bleak, there's quite a wide variation of perspectives, and one of the key influences of that wide variation of perspectives that we can see within the survey results is their experience of their local MP. There are many of our members, a minority I'm afraid, a relatively small minority, but still a significant number, who feel they have very positive experience of their local MP, and I think some of those MPs probably have things to teach the rest of you. Without wishing to embarrass you, Tracy, you are actually one of the MPs who did very well relative to most of your colleagues in this survey. And our members actually gave quite a lot of examples of things that you have done that they feel makes you stand out and makes you different. So you're a good person for the rest of the committee to be learning from with some of these questions. The other thing that came through in the detail of the survey is that there's a lot of practical suggestions for ways that the system could change that would make our members feel that it was more worth engaging in. They range from having a none of the above option on the ballot paper to the right to recall to an optimism and a hope that non-party organisations can contribute more to democracy in the future. So, as to summarise my opening remarks, I think this is a crisis. I think it's a crisis that parliamentarians and those within the political classes need to take responsibility for. And I think it's something that calls for leadership, but that the kind of leadership that is about taking criticism on the chin and acknowledging that there's a need for really big change. And I guess the fact that over 100,000 38 Degrees members have taken the trouble to fill in this survey suggests a certain amount of optimism and hope that you're prepared to do that. And I think that's probably a direct result of you having extended the invitation for us to come here.
Great. Thank you, David. Chris?
Just a quick one. I'm sorry I've got to leave to do a first order question, so I won't be able to stay for the whole of your evidence. But I was disappointed that in describing the people who responded to this survey, you didn't actually draw attention to the fact that a very small proportion of those who responded identified themselves as Conservatives. A disproportionately large number identified themselves as Liberal Democrats, since only about 8 or 9% of the people in the population saying they vote Liberal Democrat, almost same number of Liberal Democrats as Labour people responded to the survey, and an enormous number of Greens. So how can the survey be representative of the people as a whole?
Well, I don't think they've identified themselves as Liberal Democrat or anything else. They've identified themselves as having voted for a party at the last election. To be honest, I suspect that the number who are saying that they would vote Liberal Democrat at the last election will probably be quite different. And indeed, I suspect all these figures will be quite different. I said at the start that I thought that it wasn't an unbiased sample of the general population, but 38 Degrees members come together around a set of values, and I listed what those values are. I have heard members of all political parties, and none, express an alignment with those values. It does seem within our membership that at the last election, our members leant in particular directions, and yes, you're correct that fewer 38 Degrees members voted Conservative at the last election than the general population, though actually quite a significant number did. I think it's around 20%, isn't it? So I guess one of the things actually that our members sometimes talk about as a reason why they find, as a cause of their disappointment with politicians, is a sense of an eagerness that they perceive among some MPs to dismiss them and to put them in a category or say that they are coming from a particular persuasion, whereas actually, yes, they vote, and that means they, at any point in time, they're in a particular category. But first and foremost, they're just people who care about stuff and are getting in touch with their MP because they have an opinion on an issue.
But I mean, I haven't put them in the category. You've put them in the category. You put them in the category in your evidence.
How do you mean?
Well, because you've identified that the people who answered your survey, fewer than a fifth, were Conservative supporters, but more than a half were Liberal Democrat and Labour supporters. So you've done the categorisation. I haven't done the categorisation. I've
just sought to give you a picture of the kind of people who are responding. Is it that you feel that this makes their views less useful? I'm not sure I understand what it is you're getting at.
Well, I'm asking the questions, and you're hopefully going to be answering them. But
yeah, I'm sorry if I don't understand the question. It's harder for me to answer.
The question is that when you initially introduced your remarks about the nature of the people who responded to the survey, you did not identify at that stage the fact that the survey was very much biased in favour of people who held, certainly at the last election, views supporting either the Greens, the Liberal Democrats, or the Socialists, and therefore the survey cannot be representative of the people as a whole, because at the last general election, a lot more people voted Conservative.
with respect, in terms of me concealing things from you, which seems to be what you're applying, it's on page 1 of the written evidence that I gave you. And I set out the values and the ethos of 38 Degrees in my opening remarks. So I don't think anything is being conceived. What I infer that you are getting at is a suggestion that 38 Degrees has some kind of party political agenda, which we are concealing, and that I am happy to refute. We're independent of all political parties, and on numerous occasions have challenged and held to account members of Parliament of all political parties.
Paul?
The distribution in the age groups is interesting, both in the response and do you think there's that people, particularly young people, see any connection between the facts that most governments now agree with taking benefits from young people and giving additional unneeded benefits to rich pensioners?
David?
And is this a consequence of the number of people who vote?
David?
I don't think from the survey from this survey I'm able to give you a very clear sense of that. It's something I've heard some younger 38 Degrees members observe, but it's certainly not something that comes through really loud and clear. I guess my perception would be in terms of a lot of older 38 Degrees members in this survey have talked about voting and participation as something that they do out of a sense of civic duty, but almost despite of whether they think it's going to make any difference. And I'd speculate that maybe that sense of civic duty as a good reason for doing something that you fundamentally think is a bit of a waste of time maybe runs less deep with some young people.
The influence of this committee and those of us who believe strongly in voter engagement has been in competition with the very eloquent and attractive voice of one particular person with his 7 million Twitter followers, who's urging young people, not to vote. I mean, how can one counter that?
Are you talking about Russell Brand?
Yes, Russell Brand.
Always, unfortunately.
Always, he's the invisible figure that dominates this discussion.
Yeah, when Russell Brand did that interview on Newsnight, we posted it up on the 38 Degrees Facebook page, and a really, really interesting debate ensued between those who thought his verdict that it was a bad idea to vote was a correct one or a deeply harmful one, and positions in between. I think the majority of 38 Degrees members felt that they disagreed with him in terms of his prescription, but actually the overwhelming majority of him did agree to a fairly significant extent with his diagnosis of the deep problems with parliamentary democracy in the UK as it exists.
Isn't the danger it's likely to be deepening the disengagement when an attractive figure makes it fashionable for young people not to vote? It becomes a thing not to do. And it's very difficult to counter that when you have an array of Dad's Army MPs urging them to vote.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you should ask him to come and give evidence to you. But
what a good idea! No, that's brilliant.
But I would observe that alongside offering, I think two things that I've perceived and lots of 38 Degrees members have observed to me about the kind of backlash to Russell Brand. One is that I think he's highlighting some important problems, and I think shooting a messenger or criticising for not having all the answers when they're highlighting an important problem is something that not many of the public have that much sympathy with. They think it's legitimate for someone to say, this is wrong, I'm not claiming to have all the answers, but this is wrong. Secondly, Russell Brand, I know, has been engaged in campaigns that have had a parliamentary focus alongside his expressing his views on voting around drugs regulation reform. And that's something that has engaged a lot of people in the political process. So I think I can see why people in your position would see him as a kind of bête noire. Actually, I think he's got some quite interesting things to say, and it's probably I really think it might be worth you seeking evidence from him.
I rest my case. I have to leave, not because of the brilliance of your answers, which I'm delighted with, but I do have to leave anyway. Thank you very much.
He's got an appointment with Russell Brand. Tracy.
David, thank you for your kind comments. I have to say I don't blush easily, but you succeeded in making me do so this morning. Do you recognise how much influence you as an organisation have on the way people think about politics and politicians, in the same way that perhaps Russell Brand might not appreciate how much influence that he has, and with that influence comes responsibility?
Yes, certainly. Though I don't think that... I think often when politicians are talking to me about that influence, they don't necessarily understand quite how 38 Degrees works. So I think they think about us in categories of institution and organisation which are familiar to them, namely particularly political parties and their centralised structure where decisions about what a policy position is are taken by a small group of people and then broadcast out. And it then depends on how effective party discipline is as to how many people think that thing. 38 Degrees works in the opposite way. So the way that we decide what our policy positions are and the way we decide what we are campaigning about is decided by our membership, who are continually being surveyed and their views solicited as to what we should be campaigning on, which means that when you see an email going out to 38 Degrees members about a campaign, it's not that people in the office are telling 38 Degrees members what to think, it's that 38 Degrees members have asked us to run a campaign on that issue. Their feedback and their input has shaped the message, but is then going back out to all 38 Degrees members. So the extent to which I'm deciding what 38 Degrees members do or think is, in my view, hugely exaggerated often when politicians talk about our influence. We obviously have a coordination role as a staff team, and that brings with it a certain amount of power and a lot of responsibility, but we don't decide what 38 Degrees members campaign on.
But you've got over 2 million members of 38 Degrees, and they're obviously, that they've signed up because they agree with the ideals and principles of 38 Degrees, which you outlined earlier. You have a captive audience in many respects with the campaigns that you run. Do you think, though, that they, and indeed the outcomes of the survey, do you think they reflect society more broadly, or do you think that this is just a reflection of the 2 million members that have signed up to the principles of 38 Degrees?
Well, I said at the beginning that the survey respondents are not simply an unbiased sample of the general population, and I offered some thoughts as to the ways in which I think they differed around values. Not everyone in the UK, sadly, would subscribe to values of community and democracy and sustainability and fairness, but a lot do. I also talked about like the age bias and the activity bias. So no, I don't necessarily think that everyone in the UK thinks exactly as 38 Degrees members do. I do think, however, that they are a very broad section of people, pretty ordinary people from all areas of the UK, and if they don't hold every persuasion of view that is present across the UK, they probably know someone who does. And so I guess I would suggest that they probably represent a wider section of opinion than normally gets to have their evidence heard, say, at a select committee hearing.
The previous witnesses to this inquiry cited various reasons why we have low turnout, such as dissatisfaction with the electoral system, lack of confidence in politicians, lack of knowledge about the process. You've highlighted some of those responses in your survey, but do you think that organisations like yours actually represent an alternative to the traditional participation in politics?
A partial alternative, probably. I don't think anyone within 38 Degrees, whether our membership or our staff, believe that 38 Degrees is the answer to all problems, or that 38 Degrees could replace Parliament. I think we probably, like the fact that so many people choose to get involved in organisations like 38 Degrees or other organisations, and that membership of our kinds of organisation is growing at a time when party political participation is declining, that there's probably something interesting in that. Our members tell us, for example, that they like the way that they feel that 38 Degrees' agenda is shaped by them, that 38 Degrees responds to their views, that it gives them opportunities to, it gives them a menu of ways they can get involved, both on and offline, that works for them. I think some of those things probably are things that you could learn from.
Okay, thank you.
Mark?
In terms of your survey, the option that people indicated was most likely to encourage them to vote was the option of none of the above, essentially an anti-vote option being included. What do you think your members would see as the advantages and disadvantages of having such an option on the ballot paper, and how do you think it would skew campaigning either at a local or national level?
So I would probably put none of the above within an election cycle and the right of recall outside of an election cycle together a bit. I think there's a sense from a lot of our members that the way politics works, partly because of an electoral system where there are lots of safe seats and safe council wards, and partly because of the kind of culture and the way that our members perceive there to be a political class that is made up of quite a narrow section of the population, that often these things are basically a stitch-up. There's not much chance of them changing the outcome, and the party man, and it is normally a man who's got that seat, can kind of take it for granted. So I think they see none of the above as a way of participating without being forced to fit into the categories that suit those people, in the same way that they see recall as an opportunity to challenge an incumbent and keep them on their toes. I mean, look, for me, so I'm probably going to vote in the local elections in a couple of months' time. I live in Hackney. It's always going to be Labour councillors. My councillors don't live in my ward. They don't respond to requests for assistance. They're not just don't seem very interested. But they're going to win. Why should I vote? What's the point? I probably will, because I'm the kind of person who thinks there's a sense of duty, but I'll do so knowing I'm wasting my time. I think it would be quite nice to send those people a wake-up call and tick the none of the above box. That would make it feel more meaningful to me.
And how would you see it working in terms of a result where there's
where none of the above wins?
Pretty high vote for none of the above.
Well, you'd have to have some kind of rerun, wouldn't you? And hopefully that would send a signal and stir things up, and you'd have new candidates. Maybe it would trigger some open primaries. Say, I think that's another thing our members find interesting. The idea that rather than somebody, the way that someone becomes the candidate being their primary, the primary things they have to do to become the candidate being showing a sense of loyalty and working for a very narrow section of society, those who are selecting locally, plus raising the money from a very small number of donors in order to be able to run the campaign locally, that the first thing they'd have to do in order to get them on the ballot paper be to win an open primary. That's quite an interesting idea as well, I think. Mm-hmm. Maybe none of the above could trigger an open primary.
So you've looked at other places where this happens?
So we did this survey last week, and I was surprised at how strongly none of the above jumped out as an option. To be honest with you, that means it's something that I intend to do more looking at and think about as a staff team how we can explore with our members campaigning for that. That's how 38 Degrees works. So I only had about a day's more warning than you did that it was something that was going to stand out in this survey.
Yeah. And any other changes strike you that your membership indicated may make them more likely to participate in future elections?
Yeah, they listed a few. So I think those would probably be... So recall, I think, was an important one. None of the above was an important one. I think they... Within the theme of perceiving politicians to not be working for them, to be working for others, issues around donations and funding of political parties, I think, is a big issue. A sense that their MPs should be listening to them, representing them, but too often they're beholden to donors. and that those are the people who get in here. So reform of that is something that our members are quite keen on. We got a lot of the thoughts around other changes to the voting system in terms of AB plus and PR and stuff like that. I wouldn't say one single system jumped out as like the clear front runner there.
Are you still pursuing that in most people to a referendum?
Like I said, it's not something that 38 Degrees is campaigning on at the moment, but it's something that a lot of our members in varying forms offered critiques and frustrations about the current first past the post system.
Right, sorry.
But if you kept on... sorry.
Yeah. Have you done, Mark?
Yeah.
Just a quick one from me, and then I want Tracy to have a follow-up, David. It's always, any campaigner will tell you this, and you're an effective campaigner, you'll know this, it's always easier to get a no. It's always easier to get a negative. And we've all probably done that in our own various ways in the past. So, yeah, I'm against those MPs. I don't like what the government does. I don't like councillors, they don't do this and the other. And you can get a good chunk of people that come to that. Part of what we're trying to do in our inquiry, which we need your help on, is to figure out the positives. What are the things that we can get progressed? What are the specific issues? And that often requires a more nuanced approach than fill out a questionnaire. And I am not giving you the whole responsibility of finding all the answers here, but all I'm saying is it's a difficult thing to tease out from people, and we need to understand what those mechanisms might be in order to get some of the answers, because they are often quite sophisticated, quite nuanced. They are about structures. For example, how many people know the difference between Parliament and government? I would argue Parliament is very, very weak and not much good at its job. Government is incredibly strong and controlling. Now, if you take that argument beyond a questionnaire, it's rather hard to get that over. How do we, and in fact how do you, have a great responsibility talking to your 2 million members, get those more nuanced and sophisticated arguments across in order to get some positive proposals, which is what my committee is really looking for at the end of this process.
Okay.
Sorry, that was a bit long-winded. Even that's hard to explain.
You might need to help keep me on track with my answer to this. But here are a few thoughts. I guess a key message that came out of this survey, I think, from our members is that while they don't reject the idea that kind of mechanistic changes to mechanisms and structures are necessary, I think we're talking about culture here and attitude here as well, that they perceive politicians to not respect them and not listen to them. And they will attribute that to structures and mechanisms, and they talk about, say, even those MPs who have good intentions being constrained by the system we have, but they also perceive something that goes in at the cultural level here about...
That's the easy bit. No.
I don't think culture change is easy.
That's the easy bit, to say MPs don't do this and other people. But what do we do about that?
Well, just to without wishing to make Tracy blush, like there were some examples our members gave of, say, before the vote in Parliament on Syria, I believe you contacted all the constituents for whom you had an email address, asking them what they thought and what they should do. But also, and our members noted this as well, telling them what your initial instinct as to what you were going to do was and why. So you did two things, both of which I think are the ways that normal human beings talk to each other most of the time. You said what you thought, but you also listened. And you did so in a way that our members perceived to be respectful. They probably also agreed overwhelmingly with the voting decision you then took on the basis of that, but that's more likely to happen if you have that conversation in the first place. That's the kind of thing that I'm only aware of, like one or two other examples of an MP ever doing that. Yet, we're talking here about something where you are carrying a responsibility to represent your constituents on a grave matter that could lead to people's lives being put in the firing line. Actually, if you think about it, it feels like, to me, like quite an obvious thing to do in that situation, yet it's something that hardly anyone ever does. I think that's an example of where the culture of Parliament and its attitude towards voters, I know of far more examples of MPs responding to a group of 38 Degrees members wishing to come to see them to deliver a petition, those MPs calling the police on them or making them wait outside in the rain rather than inviting them into the corridor of their office or whatever. I know of far more examples of that than I do of an MP proactively emailing their constituents and asking them what they think about something.
Okay. Tracy, you wanted to follow up on...
As it happens, I got quite a lot of negative comment from colleagues, traditional colleagues, who are saying you're elected with a mandate to make a decision, why are you bothering to engage? And actually, as it happened, I felt very strongly about that. But that wasn't the follow-up question. I want to just follow up on the question that Mark had about none of the above. Do you recognise that if we were to have a none of the above option, then perhaps we ought to make voting compulsory? Do you think it can work without compulsory voting?
So I think I've owned up, but this is not an area of policy expertise for me. My members have now told me to become an expert in this, but I only got that instruction a few days ago. I think I understand how that would logically follow. I'm not sure it would be necessary, and I'd want to think about it more.
Okay.
What happens if none of the above gets elected?
Chris?
I think I guess the point clearly you've got a problem. I think my counter argument would be that, to be honest, you've got that problem if none of the above would have won if you'd given the option. You're just hiding it from yourselves, and someone is collecting a salary as an MP despite the fact that a majority of people wanted to vote for none of the above. And it's better to have that problem out in the open and think about what the solutions are than to rig the system so that can't happen.
David?
Thank you, Chair. The written evidence that you submitted presents a picture of broad disenchantment with politicians. If you know what Tracy's profile is, why are you doing private polling in marginal constituencies? And if so, would you be tailoring the questions to reflect the demographic of your members to give them an advantage?
Are we doing private polling in marginal constituencies?
Yes, if you know what Tracy's response is, are you doing private polling in other constituencies? If Tracy's flashed up, I could flash up. Anyone around this table could flash up.
So what we did was when people filled in the survey, they also completed entered their address, which means you can then look at the responses by constituency, so you can see patterns within those. Mm-hmm. So it's not really private polling. I'm telling you.
And MPs like Michael Fabricant who stop responding to 38 Degrees because he feels there's a bias. You're saying to us quite categorically that the questions are not tailored to the demographic of your members.
Well, what we do, they're tailored in the sense, but what we do is we talk about politics in the way ordinary people talk about it, and the way that we decide what are the issues that we're talking about are the issues our members tell us to talk about. So it's quite a transparent process, really. We're continually posting up on our Facebook wall, emailing out to our members saying, what do you think, what do you want us to do? And then we go out with those things. So in that sense, we are quite transparently tailoring our content to what our members want us to do. We're running the campaigns they vote for us to run.
But not many normal people come descending on the MP's offices with petitions, national petitions, in a cardboard box and a CD. And if I remember rightly, we met 3 years ago and had organised a meeting in one of the committee rooms where we had a condition of 10 items that we would like to have worked with 38 Degrees on as MPs across all parties, and not one of those 10 conditions was met by yourself. Can you explain that?
Well, remind me what those 10 conditions were.
Those 10 conditions were filters on the site mainly. I haven't got the 10 in front of me, but I could dig them out and send them to you. But the bottom line was that you agreed to work with the MPs to get a better consensus so that it would enable the staff. It was mainly staffers that was in this committee room meeting, and it was actually applauded all the way through Parliament by all members of Parliament and all political divides that we would like to engage with 38 Degrees in a more constructive way, where we don't see people descending on MPs' offices with CDs in boxes, large boxes, to make a political point.
You see, I think what you're saying is you object to members of the public who are your constituents coming to see you to talk about a political issue.
No, Mr. Babs, you totally misread what we're saying. We want to engage with the public, we really do, and we do engage with the public. And it's quite funny that I was talking to an MP from, say, 5 parliaments ago, where he used to get 4 letters a day. We actually get about 400 emails a day, each and every one of us in this room. We do engage with our public a lot more than what we ever have done, but we would like to engage in a way so that we don't have to be using copious amounts of parliamentary time to be responding to individual emails where people write in and tail at the bottom, as you have on your website, individual responses. If we send back a generic response to your generic question, we're immediately portrayed as not listening, and that is not the case.
So I think there are a few things in that. I'm going to try and infer questions from it. The first is this question of what should engagement look like, and I think lots of our members perceive, one of the reasons they feel very frustrated with a lot of members of Parliament is they see engagement as something MPs wish to do on their terms and their issues at their bidding, and when so they perceive MPs to be very keen to appear in a way that looks good for them, particularly in the run-up to an election, but more generally as well, and probably more generally as well the more you're in a marginal seat, but not to have complicated conversations and to explore disagreement. And that is actually quite a patronising form of engagement. And people can smell that it's not sincere. It's about the picture in the local paper rather than an actual conversation about actual policy. I guess the second thing that I was hearing in what you said was the view that members of the public benefiting from the fact that the internet makes it easier to communicate and organise with each other in order to get in touch with their MP and express a view as to a policy position, that is inauthentic or illegitimate or downright annoying. Now, I very much agree that MPs could do with better technology and better capabilities to engage with the public digitally. I think there are examples of MPs who do it very well, but most of them don't. I think that is probably more about culture and capability than it is about resourcing, but I think it should be properly resourced. But I think the starting point for that has to be that voters getting in touch with their MPs is their democratic right and a good thing. And when, as so many of you do, I'm afraid, you go back to members of 38 Degrees and your starting point is that you're annoyed that they've got in touch and you're rude to them, then it's great for 38 Degrees because it's as an organisation, it makes them far more likely to donate to us and stick with us because it's a great illustration of how your system is broken and that they're better off sticking with us. But in terms of democracy, it's terrible.
Okay. I think, David, I'm going to come back to David. I start as someone who is immensely sympathetic to what you're trying to do and using means of technology. I'm encouraged that you recognise that there might be some resource questions that arise and it might be something you want to put to your members. Perhaps they'd support MPs having additional resources to do their job more effectively. And you've got to take on some of the unpopular issues as well as the not popular.
I've never heard our members argue that MPs shouldn't spend money on having an office that helps them respond to their constituents. Good. I've heard them argue that there are all kinds of other things that MPs shouldn't spend money on, but they do, but not that. Yeah.
No. Let me just pursue this. I'll come back to you, Andrew. So that would be helpful, and that's what I mean by the nuance. It's actually quite easy for me and you to stereotype every MP, and we cash in then on a fantastic anti-media campaign, anti-MP campaign in the media, and it's cool to criticise members of Parliament. Actually, what I want to do is enable members of Parliament to be as responsive as you want all MPs to be. So, if I may put words in David's mouth or an argument in David's head, so to speak, if you get 300 emails asking you to oppose the lobbying bill, let's say, which happened, I can do nothing other than respond in a standard way. I cannot possibly personally tailor a reply to someone who's sent me a standard campaigning email. So the response to a standard campaigning email is a standard reply. And it's not possible to delve beyond that and get into someone's head and imagine what they were trying to get to. So sometimes it will have to be that way.
Of course.
There are ways of being much more sophisticated in the use of the technology, targeting effectively, filtering effectively, which and I cannot speak for other colleagues, but I'd be amazed if other colleagues wouldn't welcome this immensely. So, David, I'm going back to it's so easy to be negative. What's tough is to help us get this job done more effectively, to help us improve voter engagement. And I think, yes, we have to look at ourselves and everything we're doing, but also all those who want to help us need to do that so that they're helping us in the best possible way.
So, can I just clarify though?
Of course, yes.
So
yes.
I do not think I do not hear from our members very often. I do occasionally, but not very often. The criticism that they have sent to 300 people who asked them the same thing, the same response. I think most people think that they wouldn't expect you to have 300 different opinions on the same thing.
Okay. Good.
If there is a criticism of your responses, it is not so much that they see you sending the same response to 300 people. It is that the response they perceive you to be sending is not your opinion at all, but something that is towing the party line, which is a different criticism.
But aren't MPs, in a sense, aren't you making MPs think that about all your members when they send a standard rather than say, I've read some stuff and this is my opinion? I think anyone who's ever sent me a personal email gets a personal reply. But someone who has done what you've just accused MPs of doing, who's just sent something through from HQ, in a sense, off to MPs, who, believe it or not, I have 2 people work with me in my office in the House of Commons. If I get 300 emails, then that does impact upon the work I do. I'm a select committee chair, I'm an active backbencher, I do lots of things, policy things, etc. It really, David, I'm asking for your help here.
Yeah.
I'm not having a go at 38 Degrees, which I think is a wonderful organisation. What I'm trying to say is we need to get a little bit more sophisticated beyond the sort of e-petitioning into a proper relationship, and I'm trying to tease out how we get there.
But what I'm saying is that proper relationship is not about a relationship between me or any of the other 38 Degrees staff and MPs. It's about how MPs relate to their voters, and that, like, the starting point. If the first way that most people have never been in touch with their MP about anything. Yeah, the first time they do, it's actually quite a big deal. It's not something that most people just do at the drop of a hat. And making it easy to them means giving them tips, giving them template text to do so.
Yeah.
Now, if their first experience back is something that starts with, thanks for your identikit clone email from evil Marxist conspiracy 38 Degrees, and I'm more or less quoting directly from something that quite a few MPs send.
But don't make that as the stereotype for all members.
No, it's not. No,
I think you're getting into being a little unfair there.
I haven't said it's the stereotype for all members of Parliament.
I've said in response to what I thought was a rather measured question.
No, but what I'm saying, if that is the response, then that reinforces, like, you're confirming you're doing what people will expect you to do, and it's reinforcing that. Now, if you say, you're up front and say, yeah, I've had a lot of people contact me with this, so I'm letting you all know what I think, and then you invite them for further opportunities to engage. You ask them what they think as well, and you do so in a polite way.
Yeah.
Then the tone is very different.
Which is exactly what I did on the lobbying bill. Everyone who emailed me, I sent them an email within 24 hours saying, please come and meet me at the weekend. And actually...
And some people came to see you, didn't they?
They did. It was fantastic. And the other thing is, people were saying I should be opposing the lobbying bill. I hope my colleagues will support me and say I doubt there's anybody in the House who spent more time opposing the lobbying bill. So it was interesting to receive an email saying you should be opposing the lobbying bill, because I think I was actually overachieving in a Stakhanovite level.
And I think that's an example of where the 38 Degrees technology could and will get more sophisticated in letting people know exactly what their MP is doing.
I think it'd be good news for the MPs, and it'd be great news for your policy agenda as well, to have that level of sophistication to draw that out. David, I'd better come back to...
No, thank you, Chair.
Right.
Okay. Mr. Bams, I believe that you're a pioneer and you should be congratulated for that, for 38 Degrees. I think it's good that we do have you, and I do think it's good that we are able to engage with our constituents through your organisation. So what I'm saying in a collegiate manner, please come back to us, and if we can work together in a more constructive way as MPs across all parties with 38 degrees, I'm absolutely certain everyone around this table would agree that that would be a good step forward.
Okay.
Just to add a little rider to that, if you represent a constituency like mine, of course, there are a lot of information poor, so to speak, people who are not on text, not on the web, and absolutely not email traffickers. And so there's the point about being representative is quite a significant one for those people. And part of our inquiry is to ensure that those people are properly represented and that their voter engagement is as important as the articulate and capable who can organise technically.
I think that's a really good point, and one of the things on that I would draw your attention to within the results was where in the question what would make you more likely to register to vote, the biggest answer is politicians that better represent me, but the second biggest is being asked by an organisation that I trust. And one of the things that 38 Degrees members have been doing recently, working with some other organisations I think that you've also called for evidence, like Bite the Ballot and the NUS, is participation in voter registration activities. So, for example, recently 38 Degrees members were running stalls in Asda's around the country, where they were making it possible for people to vote, to register to vote, and hopefully in that way reaching people who don't necessarily have access to the internet, for example. Now, one practical thing that I think your committee could recommend would be a measure that would make it easier for organisations other than the Electoral Commission, the government and the political parties to get involved in that kind of thing. Obviously, the lobbying bill, which you were a committee that highlighted some of the ways in which that did terrible damage to the potential for that to happen. And that's something that we're all grappling with now. But another instance where some good could be done in the short term is the Electoral Commission is currently working on an online voter registration system. I think it would be hugely beneficial for everyone if they built that with an open API, basically so that it's a technical mechanism which means that other organisations can build tools and put plugins into their own website which talk to the back end of that online registration system, which enable them to come up with creative ways or different ways of making it possible for people to register online to vote. So, for example, it would mean that 38 Degrees developers could build, an iPad app that our members could then take into offline locations and use to register to people to vote straight into the back of the Electoral Commission website. It's technically possible. It runs against the culture of government and how these things are normally done. But I think what you'd do is you'd unlock the capacity for all kinds of other players to innovate, to try different ways of making it easier for people to register to vote, and also for just people who they trust more and are more likely to listen to make the case to them rather than it being a government official.
Chris?
On the spectrum of engagement, I would put your 2 million members probably right over here. They probably voted, they're engaged through a 5-year period of a parliament. Then there's the people who vote. Then there's the people who are on the register and don't vote. There's 11 million of them. And then there's the people who are not even on the register, 6.5 million. Mm-hmm. So the chair has mentioned the issue of how you use your position as the best, most engaged to help the 6.5 here and the 11 million there. It's a huge number. Democracy is not working whilst we've got these. And I'm really pleased about what you said there about the open link for registration. Would your organisation consider other measures by holding the electoral, not just MPs, electoral registration officers locally to account that are not doing their job, some of them repeatedly over 4 or 5 years not doing their job, holding the Electoral Commission to account that intend to introduce photo ID before you go and vote? This has only been done in America in the Republican states. It's been proposed by the Electoral Commission here. What impact on democracy? What more can you do besides these open links?
So before I go on to answer that, I would like to just slightly challenge that description of where 38 Degrees members are on the spectrum, because I think one of the things that's a reality here is that the spectrum doesn't quite look like that. So there are a significant number of 38 Degrees members, a minority, but I think a revealing minority, who are very, very active with 38 Degrees, but don't vote and aren't registered to vote because they don't see the point. And I think sometimes, I think this is a really important point to make, because what we're talking about here is not just, I'm sure there are some people who are apathetic, I'm sure there are some people who could be better educated, but I don't think fundamentally that's the problem. It's a perception of it being worthwhile, of it making a difference. And so you have people who care a lot, are by no kind of ordinary measure of the word apathetic, but don't see the point in registering to vote, or don't vote. And I think you have to recognise that as part of the problem if you're going to get to the right solution. So that said, I think 38 Degrees believes that democracy is better if more people get involved. That's like one of our core ethoses. So we are, the voter registration days are an example of us experimenting in that area and giving our members ways of getting involved in that. As we get nearer to a general election, we will be thinking both about online means of making the case for voting and offline means. I think in general, the work of the Civil Society Commission on democratic engagement, but was critiquing the progress of the lobbying bill, made a very powerful case that non-partisan organisations getting involved in the issues, both during the whole course of a parliament and during electoral cycles, is a key way by which you bring politics to life, by which people actually see why it matters. And we all now, all of us organisations that are not political parties but care about issues which pertain to politics, are now facing huge new constraints on what we're allowed to do, and that's going to be a big issue for us all going into the next election. So we're talking about something that is potentially a huge backward step.
Okay, Chris, you finished?
If you've got other suggestions,
Andrew, did you have something, or has it been answered?
I don't think it has been answered, but it was an interruption of yours.
Okay, right. Really quickly, Andres, yeah.
Just very quickly, just going back to the original point that I made about influence equaling responsibility, do you recognise that sometimes some of the issues that you raise, and as you know, I'm actually a big supporter of 38 Degrees and do engage with people, but do you recognise that actually ensuring that people fully understand that the issue that they're raising, and indeed that means using the correct terminology, is incredibly important? So when people were getting in touch with me about the lobbying bill but calling it the gagging bill, and then ringing my office and saying, what's Ms Crouch going to do about the gagging bill? Saying, well, there is no such thing as the gagging bill in front of Parliament. I mean, that's incredibly important. Referring to the bedroom tax does actually give you a political bias by doing so. That's what I mean about influence and responsibility, is that if you're going to get people to engage in politics, in policy, they need to do so on a completely level playing field, on an issue that is important, but they recognise and understand what it is that they are talking about.
So I agree with the premise underlying your question, but understanding is an important ingredient in effective engagement. I don't think I agree that giving things accessible labels, descriptive labels, rather than only using the language of the formal political process, it is a necessary prerequisite of that. And to be honest, I don't think
it disengages them with the process if they're not referring to it.
Well, but I guess, say on that, I mean, I perceived politicians doing exactly that with the Lobbying and Transparency and Trade Union Regulation Act, or whatever it was called, in that it had a rebrand halfway through from being the lobbying bill to the transparency bill. Everyone uses shorthand all the time, not just 38 Degrees. And what we do try to do all the time is talk about things in an accessible way. And to be honest, I think one of the ways in which the political classes close rank and keep people out is to use deliberately complicated words and deliberately inaccessible processes to make it baffling to ordinary people. And that's something that we unapologetically resist. In doing that, do we need to be mindful of seeking to also be accurate? Yes, we certainly do. I'm afraid I continue to believe that the gagging law is a more accurate label for the Lobbying and Transparency and Trade Union Act, or whatever it's actually called, than its official name.
Well, you know,
certainly more so than the Transparency Bill.
Yeah.
Okay. Quick one, Andrew.
Yes, you said a moment ago that there were things that you didn't want to pay us for doing. What are those things?
Do you really want me to bring
Yes,
up
I
the
do.
expenses scandal?
No, I want you to tell me what I am doing lawfully, that you don't wish to pay for.
So overall, I think it's not very long since people heard all kinds of examples of many members of Parliament claiming expenses for everything from duck houses to
not something that happened 6 years ago.
Okay, but I
you
think
can't think of any. Can you?
Well,
no, you can't.
You're not really giving me a chance to answer.
Well, I'm waiting.
So the kind of things in terms of money that I think concern 38 Degrees members would be a sense that, well, what proportion of your office staff's time is spent actually engaging with voters and seeking to solicit their views and understand their issues versus organising photo opportunities and making them look good.
I'm sorry. I'm really interested in this. You think my staff spend a whole lot of time arranging photographs. Is that true?
Well, I think most MPs are pretty assiduous in seeking to get themselves in the local papers.
But that doesn't necessarily mean they're paid. They're done by people who are paid to do it.
No, but
right.
But I think that does happen as well.
It does.
It definitely happens as well.
But I'm talking about
plenty of
serious.
So MPs still employ their relatives quite a lot.
And what's wrong with that?
Well,
what's wrong with it?
I think the problem with it is that generally, like say in most other walks of life, most ordinary people have jobs where they have an employer.
Yes,
who
and I'll tell you.
Right, look, are you asking me questions or shouting at me?
No,
Shall I just
I'm
be quiet?
not shouting at you. I'm saying you must use your common sense rather than just pick things out of hats and say we hate local people who've got local staff working for them.
No,
that's an example which can work very well. And I think you're trying to persuade us that there are, as the chairman suggested, that there are one or two MPs who behaved wrongly, and that's now the judgment of everyone.
Well, no. What I'm saying is that you have a trust problem, across the board. Yes. I think there are very good reasons for that trust problems, and MP expenses is one example of that. The Iraq War is another example of that. There are all kinds of reasons why people don't... please let me finish. You have a trust problem. And in that situation, now, I raised the issue of MPs employing their relatives. Now, you're quite right that there were many other walks of life where it might also be perfectly appropriate, but the best person for the job might be a relative of yours. But in other areas of life, other things are also in place. So you have a manager or a board or a group of people to whom you're accountable who pay your wages and can check those decisions and scrutinise them. And if you're not doing a good job, at any given point, they can sack you. That isn't the case with MPs.
Sorry,
you have a job description that lays out your responsibilities.
What you did was you said there were things you didn't want to pay us for. I'm not paid for those things which are illegal, but you're saying that you, and I accept that, I think it's quite correct that we have the right to, that the Parliament have the right to call us back. I think that's reasonable. And as you know, the government are backing it, although their version is rather different from mine. But what I'm trying to work out is, what things is it you really dislike, which you are paying us for now?
So that isn't the major preoccupation of 38 Degrees members is not that.
Right, okay.
The major preoccupation of 38 Degrees members is that they perceive politicians who should be working for them working for others. And another example of that, as we're on the subject of money, would be donations. So it's a shame that Christopher Chope was only here in order to kind of attack the alleged bias of 38 degrees and then left to hear the rest of my evidence. But if he'd still been here, I would have offered as an example of that to him that when 38 degrees members in his constituency see him being rude to them and dismissing them for bias and making all kinds of claims about 38 degrees and its links to the Labour Party, which are patently untrue. We've never received a penny from the Labour Party, but I then see him campaigning for the repeal of smoking legislation and not mentioning that he's been wined and dined to the tune of £2,000 last year by a tobacco company,
David,
that kind of thing is bad for trust.
You are not
Thank
dealing
you,
with
Andrew.
my question.
Thank you,
and
Andrew.
I'd be very grateful if you did.
Okay, what is it?
David, we are running over time, and also I don't think it's appropriate to, when the member has said something to you and has left, to sort of raise particular things. Maybe we can have a proper exchange about that when he can answer back, because I'm sure he has a view about that, and I'm sure you'd like to be fair. It's one of your values to everybody. And
yes, but I guess the point I'm making is that, like, in terms of Parliament's attitudes towards 38 degrees, actually what he did was quite symbolic of something that is quite corrosive of trust, which is he turned up at the beginning, told us we were biased, and then left before hearing any of our answers.
Okay.
You know,
I think you're obviously entitled to your view, but as someone who's very friendly to what you try and do, I would just say that perhaps adopting a view that Parliament, i.e. every member of Parliament, is tarred with a particular brush and fits neatly into a media stereotype, which you might inadvertently be encouraging rather than trying to work with MPs, many of whom, and I speak for myself, might feel that we're not part of the problem, we're part of the answer, and we are as powerless, not many people like to admit it as an MP, but as powerless in the face of a very over-centralised governing system in this country, that actually we probably have more in common than we have in painting each other as something, you're something, and all MPs are something. I just go back to my point about having a degree of sophistication and nuance which will lead us towards some answers rather than a mutual condemnation, which I don't think is very productive.
I'd agree with that, and one thing I wanted to pick up on when you were talking about that is that you were talking about the need for resources for MPs, and that's how I said in a flippant way about like what 38 degrees do and don't think MPs should be spending their money on. I think the other point I wished to make then was, although I think resources might be an issue, there are already examples, they are a minority, but there are examples of MPs who use technology well to engage people. Within their current resources, there are wildly different experiences that 38 degrees members have of their MPs, and they're not along party lines. They may be partly along generational lines in terms of people for whom technology is more familiar, but by and large, the single biggest distinguishing factor between those MPs who successfully engage with members of the public, 38 degrees members, in a way that enhances rather than undermines their faith in the political system is an attitudinal one, it's a cultural one. And it's an attitude that can be present in MPs of wildly different ideological starting points, completely different philosophies and agendas. And it doesn't involve, as I'm sure Tracy would agree, it doesn't involve always agreeing with the people you're engaging with. It's about respecting them, frankly, and I think what a lot of people perceive from the political class as a whole, with exceptions, is a lack of respect and perhaps partly because of the realities of a political system, they perceive that you know that you're still going to carry on collecting your salary and being an MP, whatever you say to them, and that you're not interested in their views. And they can smell that, and it makes them really frustrated, and it makes them less likely to engage.
I don't know if they can smell it, but they certainly get that stereotype very strongly from the media, and perhaps, again, having a more sophisticated view about the differentiation that there is among people who are elected by the public, rather than having they're all the same pretty much. You, as you've said quite repeatedly, David, you lot, or Parliament, I just think, in a sense, you're almost like determined to lose your friends, and it seems a bit of an odd strategy. But having said all that, I have to bring this session to a close. We've overrun, so clearly this has been an interesting session. I'll just leave you one thought, David. You are not just you sitting at the table as an ordinary person. You come as an enormous £800 gorilla with 2 million members at your back. You are a very powerful and influential person. I would like to use that influence to get from you and from your members via your organisation a serious positive package of things. Once you've done all your interaction with the members, and I know it's not easy to do that quickly, and to come back to us with some, in writing rather than necessarily bring you back, but with some ideas about how we take all this forward. Because in a sense, we all know where we are and it's not a good place. How do we get to a better place where there's greater voter engagement? And if you can help us in that, I think all of us around the table, including yourself, will be happier at the end of the day. David, thank you very much for coming in today. Appreciate your time.
Thanks for inviting me.
Take care. So, Tony, how are you? Come and join us.